Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I am joined once again by the Snake Brothers.
How's it going? Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Snake 1 and Snake 2.
That's right.
Snake 2 here.
Snake 1.
Right. Sometimes I've heard the pseudonyms Russ.
That would be me.
That's
right.
What's the other one? Adam.
Cattle? Is that what you said?
Cattle. Oh, it's cattle now. Cal. No, that doesn't sound right. Joseph? No. I don't know. Just introduce yourselves.
Well, this is Kyle. Snake 2.
That's right. And this is Russ, yeah. And we have the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we have had Soraya on our show, and we've been coming on his show quite often. Not as often as recently. We've been doing a lot of trips, but we are glad to be here and glad to be back on Where Did the Road Go for sure.
Yeah, I think I can blame your show for, I guess I now have this reputation for completely not believing in the missing 401, which is not the case. But
yeah, you are our resident scriptard on those shows. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was trying to point to problems that I see with it, but
yeah.
Well, there are problems with it. I mean,
there are problems,
but that's with anything. I mean, all of this stuff. There's different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Well, I don't agree with you guys. There's no problems. Yeah, I'm all in.
But we're not going to talk about...
yeah, the 411 episodes we did with you were great. And yeah, I think that deep dives into these topics are required.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
but tonight
really
we're gonna start out talking about Cremo and Thompson's work, which you're in the midst of reading, and I've read a chunk of, although I took the hard way and got like the 800-page version of Forbidden Archaeology, and you guys did the smart thing and got the summary.
Yes, it's called The Hidden History of the Human Race, and it's basically their abridged version of Forbidden Archaeology. So they describe it in the intro to the book as being the meat of the data without all the citations and various geological arguments or back and forths with various experts on why a certain strata is considered a certain age and things like that.
Right.
So they took all that stuff out and sort of put in all the material for a more popular audience, and it's very good.
Didn't Graham do that with one of his books too?
He may have done that with Underworld.
Was it Underworld? I thought it was Fingerprints of the Gods. I thought
it might have been. Yeah, he
shorter
might have done
version.
It's possible. Yeah, I know that there was an abridged version of Underworld that I've seen, but I don't know if he did that on purpose or not.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
because Underworld was full of. I mean, Graham's work is on that kind of stuff. He does have all the citations and all the discussions and everything. So yeah,
he pretty much has to. I mean, he's attacked so vehemently that
Yeah, that's right.
That stuff just needs, and even when he puts it there, people still, accuse him of making stuff up.
Yeah, that's right. And so what's really fascinating, there's multiple facets of this particular work, Forbidden Archaeology or The Hidden History of the Human Race. But the things that stand out to me, aside from the anomalous discoveries, and I even have a problem with that term, because to me, it's like, are the discoveries anomalous, or are they just outside of the scope of current theory?
Yeah.
I had this saying back in the day, which was like, there's no such thing as out of place artifacts, only out of date theories, right?
That's nice. I like that.
Like an artifact is where it is. It's not out of place. It's
right.
If it seems like if you think you shouldn't have found it there because of your preconceptions, then your preconceptions are wrong. So anyway, yeah. So they're considered to be anomalous finds. A lot of them are old. So we're looking at late 1800s, early 1900s things. A lot of times, right when it's right in the period before certain specific standard model finds became very accepted.
Yeah.
Such as Java Man, or other various precursor hominids. So before those were found and became part of accepted theory of the evolution of late humans, or late stage hominids, people were looking for the story. So it's basically like kind of after the idea of evolution has been accepted into the scientific community, but before they really had the story nailed down to something that they were that everybody had agreed on.
Yeah.
So people were free to look for how early is man in the evolutionary story? How far back does it go? And so a lot of these interesting finds are being found in those periods, and now they're forgotten or discarded because they don't fit the model that people came up with later after the finds of Java men and various other hominids in Africa.
Yeah, so I picked up the Forbidden Archaeology before I was doing Where Did the Road Go? And my mentality about these things is completely different now than it was then, because then, I could only afford so many books. So picking up an 800-page book was like, good, this one will last me a while. Whereas now, where I'm trying to read, 1 or 2 books a week, it's kind of like, oh, an 800-page book. I can't do that. That's way too much to read right now.
Yeah.
But so Thompson actually lived and went to Binghamton University, which is only about an hour and a half away from me. Mm. He also wrote a book called Maya, the world is virtual reality, or something to that effect, which I had read before I read Forbidden Archaeology, which I never finished, by the way. But I did read a chunk of it. But the Maya book was great. And when I started doing Where Did the Road Go and started thinking, like, what authors have I not heard, people like Patrick Harper and stuff like that, who I then contacted and were like, why haven't you been on other shows, I was like, oh, what about, what's his first name? Thompson.
Richard.
I'm like, what about Richard Thompson? I look him up and it's like, oh, he lives in Binghamton. I'm like, awesome. Maybe I can do this face to face. And he's dead. Okay. Never mind.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Like he had passed away like a year earlier. And I'm like, really? So, and then I realized, he also co-authored Cremo's book. Interesting.
Yeah.
But I had Cremo on in the first handful of shows, actually. And it was the first time that I was given questions to ask a guest. And I went through his publicity agent, and they were like, okay, here's the questions. And I'm like, the questions? But I have my own questions. And I'm like, what do I... And so I didn't make a list of questions. And when I got him on, I said, can we only talk about this stuff? And he's like, no. And I'm like, oh, I should have made a list. But that
I'm glad that he said no. That's good.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, he was open to that. We did talk about some other stuff, but I did run down the list of questions because that was from a new book I hadn't read yet. So I was kind of like, I'm curious about this stuff. But I like the fact that, he approached this from a religious stance at first. Because the religious doctrine, he's what?
It's some kind of Vedic thing, right?
Yeah.
From my understanding, yeah.
And they say that humans existed for like millions of years on this planet. And
the gist that I got was from the intros to the book, because they basically they lay it all out. Both of them is that they have that they do have these beliefs, and the beliefs basically say that humans have been part of the plan for the universe since the beginning.
Right.
So they have no problem. Number one, they don't have a problem with a very ancient universe, and number two, they think that however old the universe is, humans are just about as old because they've been part of the plan since the start.
Right.
Basically,
right.
It's a very huge generalization, I think.
And it's also a consciousness first model, I think.
Yeah.
So, he went to whatever guru he was, who was teaching him, and he said, well, this doesn't fit with the current science. Why is that? And he's like, I don't know. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe you need to look into the science and find out. And that's what Forbidden Archaeology came from.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, he said that Thompson was already doing a lot of the research, and Thompson had gathered a whole bunch of materials, asked Cremo to join him on the whole thing and saying, like, can you compile this material into a book? So I think that Thompson wasn't much. I don't know this for sure, but the basic idea I got from reading how they described the process was that Thompson was doing the research in the background, but Cremo is the one that made it into a book.
Okay.
But yeah, he makes him into a co-author. I'm not sure how much Thompson actually wrote. I think because the idea that I get from the intro of the book is that Thompson got Cremo, said like, can you turn this into a book?
Right.
Yeah. And then they had research assistants too. They talk about having assistants because they're like, yeah, can you go track this down or see if you can? Because I mean, they talk a lot. They're like, we're looking at this paper, and in the paper there are references, right? The person makes there's like a single line in this paper that sort of is dismissive towards some object or some artifact or some ancient bone. They're like, oh yeah, the foxhole jaw, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then there will be a reference, and they're like, okay, let's track down this citation, and then they find that thing, and then they find more dismissive comments, but more citations, and then they eventually are looking at like they've tracked down the minutes from a meeting in Paris about, it's like of scientists talking about this thing, and they're like, wow, this is actually a really interesting case. So they're following these lines of evidence from more recent papers back to things that are 100 years ago or more, where scientists were actually debating about these objects. And I don't know, the whole research process was really interesting. And they get into epistemology and how do we know what we know.
Right.
They discuss that in the book. They're like, here's how we think about this. Like, how can we look at evidence where the only evidence we have left, because so much time has passed, are the discussions people had about it.
Right.
It's no longer possible to go to the site because it's underwater or it's been eroded away or whatever. There's multiple reasons why an archaeological site will no longer exist after 150 years. And then he's like, and then the object itself has vanished because it passed through multiple hands and you can't track it down anymore. Or it used to be in some museum, but they tell you they've never had it. And all the records say that they did. Yeah. And so the trail just goes cold. So all we have are words of various anthropologists and geologists and even lay people or informed lay people like doctors, like sometimes it's like a doctor who is also a fossil collector finds something, Right. So you have all these words of all these people and they're arguing with each other about it. And that's all the evidence we have left of this thing. So you're like, okay, it's very well cited in the fact that all these people agreed that this artifact existed, but we can't study the artifact itself, and we can't even go to the site where it was found anymore. So how do we treat these cases?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is he says a lot of times people, modern scientists, or I mean, not just modern, but people back during when this was happening, would use all these facts to discard this evidence, saying, well, the thing no longer exists. It was probably a hoax in the first place. We can't study it, so that means we don't need to consider it. And he points, and they take pains to point out how often there are very accepted artifacts, bones, or whatever that are part of the standard model that have the same problem. They no longer exist. The site can't be gone back to. They were dug up by people who were not scientists, and yet they're fully accepted and are always put in the textbooks.
Yep. Yeah, as long as it fits the model that they accept, the evidence doesn't have to be good.
Yeah, and Kyle made a great point on our show when we were talking. He was like, "This is the problem with how did you say it? We were talking about extraordinary evidence. You go through that thought process."
I don't remember what you're talking about.
Yeah. So the whole thing, where they say, well, extraordinary evidence or extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? That's the first thing they'll say when you're like, okay, I found a gold chain and a piece of coal. And the standard model says this piece of coal is in strata that's 240 million years old, and yet here we have this object.
So that suggests that a claim that's not extraordinary doesn't require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah. So Kyle was saying, well, we have a problem with this because who gets to decide what is extraordinary and what isn't?
Yeah.
But Kyle was pointing out that the problem is that they also use it in reverse. In other words, if they say, well, this claim isn't extraordinary, so it doesn't require extraordinary evidence, and often that means it can be very, very sloppy evidence.
Yes.
Right? So it's a double-edged sword. That statement is terrible, I think, for the pursuit of science.
Yeah.
Like, evidence needs to be treated the same
no matter what.
Yeah, like if something fits within your theoretical preconceptions, it still needs to be treated just as rigorous or as not rigorous as stuff that doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So you don't get to say, well, we accept this because it fits, and therefore we don't need to ask a whole lot of questions about it. But this other thing that has just as good of a provenance as the thing that does fit, well, we're going to ask a lot more questions about this because it doesn't fit our theory. That's not the right way to do this.
No, not at all.
And that's a big thing that's happening in this book when we're going through it. You see this over and over and over, that the only reason that they discard it is really because of a priori preconceptions that are theoretical.
Yeah, and the other trend that you see is, depending on the nature of the find, say it's found in some layer of strata that is known to be a certain age. Well, if the find was maybe the details or the data around the actual find and how it was found are not that good, then they disregard the idea that it was in that strata.
Yes.
Now, if the details of the find are really well documented and there were multiple people that saw it and it was in situ in the layers, then they attack the geology. They say, well, those layers must not be that old.
Yeah.
They pick whatever they think is maybe the weakest evidence, and they just assume that evidence is incorrect, or that they can change the story there.
Yeah.
It happens over and over.
Yeah. Or they'll say, well, okay, so you found this skull, or say, you found a piece of a skull here, or perhaps it's like a stone implement, and they'll say, well, the fact that this stone implement is what we consider to be an advanced stone implement means that it can't possibly be as old as the implication of the strata that it's in. You know what I'm saying? It's they'll just say, well, that must mean that this strata has actually been rewashed and redeposited.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They go after the geological placement. They're just like, well, then they must have been stirred up without ever going to the site to see it. Like at the time, they just say, well, the strata wasn't that old then, or it was mixed up.
Yeah.
And how do you think cataclysm plays into all this?
Oh man, that's been a big part of the discussion we've had on our show, is because Kyle and I are obviously, and we're studying with Randall, with the Cosmographia podcast, we're studying with him about cataclysmic episodes and the idea of what Randall calls punctuated equilibrium. Mm-hmm. Which is, I'm sure you've heard the term, but it's basically like that, that the idea of uniformitarianism in geology is basically that's what's happening most of the time. And you have small cataclysms like local ones. But every once in a while, you have very large cataclysms that are global in scope, or at least multiple regions in scope. So an entire hemisphere, perhaps.
Right. And
those events are big enough and energetic enough to really stir things up, including large parts of the surface, to move enormous amounts of material from one part of the surface to another. Or to, if it's a volcanic event like the thing that caused the Deccan Traps, or say the Yellowstone supervolcano, where when that breaks open, it deposits enormous amounts of material in very short amount of times, geologically speaking. So when we're looking at some of these things, we're just like, well, maybe this, if you inject geologically speaking, frequent large cataclysms into the story here, perhaps some of this strata isn't as old as the standard model says, because the standard model in geology, at the very least, is basically uniformitarian all the way down.
Right.
They do now accept large cataclysmic events like the KT event, the thing that killed the dinosaurs.
Yep.
But that argument is very recent if you think about it.
Well, I mean, they just basically settled it, like within the last 6 months or something.
That's right.
I remember, we all thought, oh yeah, the comet killed the dinosaurs or whatever it was, an asteroid. That was actually heavily debated up until just like within the last year.
Well, yeah, that's right.
I remember seeing a story that was like, okay, it's finally settled.
Yeah. Didn't they say that the comet didn't completely kill the dinosaurs, but it definitely was sort of the beginning of the end?
Yeah, they describe it as being, the death blow that begins the dying, but it doesn't kill everything, obviously.
Yeah.
But what it does is it erases enough of the habitat to where the large species, and it's interesting because cataclysmic events, you can view it as like the I don't know, there's a correlation between the power or energy of the event and the extinction amount of the species that are involved, or the species that are involved in the extinction. So that it's the biggest species that die first usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So a weaker cataclysmic event will kill the species that are the largest and have the fewest members, therefore, usually, right? The smaller the species in size, the more of them there usually are. So bugs bugs can survive. Ants don't have a problem.
Sure.
But it'll kill all the dinosaurs, or in like the most recent case, the Younger Dryas, it kills the mammoths and it kills what they call the megafauna.
Yeah.
It kills everything big because those are the ones that either can't hide or have nowhere to go,
Or they require lots of food.
and they require enormous amounts of sustenance from the ecosystem. And when the ecosystem is totally overturned, they have a lot harder time feeding themselves. So
and of course you have the evolution of dinosaurs into birds too.
yeah, or it's like they are birds, and I don't know. Yeah, there's something weird going on there, and they're still debating that. Like, were dinosaurs really more bird than lizard? Than reptile? I don't know. I'm a snake. They're probably both. I'm on the lizards. I'm on the side of the lizards.
Are you a feathered serpent?
Absolutely.
Which I guess that the idea of dinosaurs having feathers and the feathered serpent and all that. I mean, what is
that?
Yeah, we have the occasional cases of people having seen or reported dinosaurs not only in modern times but in ancient cultures too.
Yeah, I don't, and I've wondered, like, and this is probably a better question for you or many of your other guests, is this a paranormal encounter?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I've listened to Where Did the Road Go for years, and one question I've always wanted to ask is, like, where are the, like, I don't know, the Neanderthal ghosts? How come all the ghosts we have are pretty recent? Are there ghosts that are like really old, 12,000 years old?
I think you first have to define ghost.
Yeah.
So if you're talking,
when you
I think they grow up.
If you're talking about recording, like a stone tape theory type of thing, where you're seeing a replay of a past event, there are cases where people have seen like Roman soldiers marching, but they're actually, what is it, above or below the ground, wherever the ground level was at the time.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's like, but that just seems to be a replay. It's like almost like that information was somehow encoded into the environment strongly, and certain people can access it.
Yeah. So the question there is, like, how long does the tape last?
Right. Okay. And probably until something disrupts it.
Mm.
But seriously, if you think about it as a type of rebirth, right? Let's say, like, one of the ways I've imagined, death is almost like going to sleep, where like you're beginning a dream and you're kind of just going along with whatever's happening in the dream. Is this an indicator of kind of what it's like? You're just born into this world and you have no idea what is going on, and you're just doing whatever is taking place. And at some point you start to realize, like, what am I doing? You start to have you start to gain the ego and start to think about self.
Right.
And then you start to learn a little bit more about your environment and how to interact with it. And, maybe ghosts are more modern because they are, they're still figuring out the world. They're children in that world, still with a lot of serious memories. Like most of their memories, most of their mind is still in the physical world, so they're concerned with all of this physical stuff, and eventually
that's what you mean by they grow up.
That's what I mean. Okay. Eventually, as they learn to interact and become more mature in that world, they're like, oh, I have limbs, I can walk, and then it's like, oh yeah, why am I hanging around here anymore? Let's go check out the entire everything.
Yeah. But that's good. And Soraya, to your question on what is a ghost, I just meant, like, when you see an apparition, when somebody sees any apparition without defining what that really is, like, do people see Neanderthal?
But I think, like, it's hard to say what a ghost is. The reason I asked the question is, I mean, are you talking about the spirit of a dead person? Are you talking about a recording in the ether or in the stone tape theory, however this stuff records itself? Or are you talking like a completely different spirit that is pretending to be something? I mean, there's so many different ways to look at this.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just wondering, has anyone seen something where they're like, that's a ghost of a mammoth? Or, I mean, people see ghosts of animals, right? Does that happen?
Yes.
Yes. I guess what I'm asking is whatever the ghost might be, whatever its mechanism is, I don't know. But do people report things where you're like, wow, that's an ancient thing, like that's a ghost of a brontosaurus or whatever?
No, but you have the time slip phenomena.
Okay, yeah.
Where people suddenly are looking into what seems to be a prehistoric scene or whatever. And, and it does seem to match up with what we think at the time, which is interesting.
Yeah. And I guess you're right, because you mentioned, Roman soldiers marching where they're like waist deep in the dirt. And I'd imagine that if there are dinosaur ghosts, most of them would be appearing maybe deep under the layers that we have.
Or they're marching around in the sky.
Yeah, they could be up in the sky. In some cases, they're down under the water.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember...
Man, that's really weird.
Man, there's T-Rexes running around in the ocean, man. That's a great mental image.
And what's the Loch Ness monster? I mean, there's no good. It's kind of like Bigfoot. There's no real suitable habitat for a large creature like that in Loch Ness.
Yeah.
But yet we've had reports of this thing going back through the ages. So is that a ghost? I mean, there are plenty of reports that seem that it's sort of morphic.
Well, isn't Loch Ness impact related?
Or it's glacier related, right? Isn't it a carved? I can't remember, but yeah.
We need a watcher.
Yeah, where's our watcher?
Let me pull this up.
All right, you be the watcher.
I'm gonna look.
Kyle's gonna find out where the watcher.
I was pretty sure that a lot of these, I seem to remember. Maybe it was Randall saying this. I can't put these words in his mouth, but I remember hearing something along the lines of a lot of these lakes where strange creatures seen they're impact related lakes.
Really?
In almost every case.
That's right. There is a water serpent sort of imagery associated with a lot of lakes that may have.
And I think the idea was that this is a memory. And I'm not talking about the apparition of some being, but that the idea that there's a serpent in the water is actually a memory from our ancestors who may or may not have witnessed or heard about or witnessed the impact itself. So the serpent in the sky comes down and creates the lake, and that's where the legend of the serpent in the lake comes from.
Gotcha. And now that energy has a form.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, so Loch Ness lies along the Great Glen Fault, which forms a line of weakness in the rocks, which have been excavated by glacial erosion.
So here's the thing about fault lines. Fault lines create earthquake lights and are very common for UFO sightings.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you would also have monster sightings because, I mean, it makes sense if you're not assuming UFOs are extraterrestrial. If you're assuming that this stuff is some form of energy that is possibly generated by the Earth, even if something is taking that energy and manipulating it, it would make sense that you would get the monster sighting along a fault line.
Yeah, there we go. Mystery solved, folks.
And we're done.
Yeah, right. Show over. We can wrap this podcast up. But no, I'm also thinking, it's excavated by glacial erosion. I wonder how long ago. I don't want to dig too deep into this, but just going back to the ghost idea. If it's a ghost of an ancient creature, it doesn't have to be dinosaur. It could be, a couple 100,000 years old. There have been some very strange megafaunal creatures fairly recently on the planet. I mean, really, it's fascinating just to think about what North America was like before the end of the Younger Dryas.
Yeah.
I mean, you got things like the 4 species of elephant.
Yeah.
Camels, horses, many species of horses, the giant sloth, the American Pleistocene lion, which was like the size of a freaking donkey or a pony. Imagine that, a big cat that big. That would be pretty terrifying. And then the short-faced bear, cave bear, lots of very large.
It's like there's some giant beaver too. I mean,
there's giant beavers, freaking 600 pounds.
I mean, the small ones are a huge nuisance. They build these gigantic dams, and then you have one that's like, gigantic, building dams and cutting down probably huge trees.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know.
So back to taking it way back to your original question about how does cataclysm fit into the stuff that we're going through in Hidden History of the Human Race or Forbidden Archaeology. I think it's interesting because the authors, in addition to laying out their I guess you would say, religious preconceptions at the beginning of the book. They're like, we're with this Vedic type of institute, and we look at the world this way, but we're really just trying to look at the science here. We do not have a problem with humans being very ancient. They also say that we fully admit that many of these finds may imply that the stratigraphic dating that is commonly accepted in standard model geology may need to be completely rethought, rather than saying these objects are incredibly ancient.
Right.
So, and then they just say, but what we're going to do is use the commonly accepted names for various geological eras and ages and epochs, and the timescales that those are commonly said to have as a starting point. We're just going to go with that. So we'll say they'll tell you, like, this object was found here, or this bone was found in this strata. We contacted the geological survey of that state or of that country, and they said that strata is dated to this time. And when you start looking at things like the really anomalous finds where they're talking about massive block walls discovered in coal mines in Iowa or whatever that are 2 miles below the surface in coal that's supposed to be 340 million years old.
Right.
You're just like, okay.
Didn't they rebury that or something?
Yeah, according to the story, the guy said it was an affidavit. So it was like, the guy swore to this, but basically, according to the story, is the coal mine was that they had to go down an elevator. They pumped air down to him, and they would go down there. And he said he set off charges in his particular room. So that down at the bottom of the shaft, they had a long drift, which is the horizontal tunnel, and every worker had a separate room, and that they were working. And they would go in there and very carefully set charges and then they would all leave and then set the charges off, and they'd wait a couple of days for it to clear. Then they'd go back down in there and start clearing out the coal that they had blown off the walls. And loading it up and stuff and shoring up the room. And he said he did that, and he went back down and he was starting to timber up the room, but he found these big he found these 1 foot on a side cubes that he said had mirror sides, but he broke one open with his pick, and he said it was concrete on the inside. It was like gravel and aggregate, but it had been polished. Right. And there were several of them lying around. And then he said that the room started to collapse on him, and he barely got out with his life. And then when he went back in, he saw that the coal face had basically fallen off a whole wall of these things.
Yeah.
And that 130 feet farther down the horizontal, the drift, in a different room, another miner had also encountered either the same wall or a different one made of the same type of cubes. And that, they pulled them all out of the mine and shut it down and told them, basically don't talk about this. And they sent them to different mines in different states.
Huh.
That was that story. And I'm just like, man, this mine is still there.
Right.
Somebody needs to go down there and find this thing.
Well, there's also the controversy about the wall in Texas there.
Oh, yeah, Rockwall.
Rockwall, yeah, which, I mean, I know they did, who was it that had the TV show where they investigated it?
Yeah, dang it.
America on Earth?
Yes.
Yeah, it was America on Earth. I can't remember the guy's name.
And he
I know it.
I know it too, and I can't remember it.
Yeah.
But he supposedly, did testing on it and said it was natural and all this other stuff. And other people are like, he didn't test the actual wall. Like, he tested a part of the what may have been the wall, but not like the main segment that everyone agreed was definitely the wall or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it's sort of under
Scott Walter.
Scott Walter.
That's it.
No, yeah, right. Yeah, and I don't want to argue too much against Scott. I mean,
I'll argue this. Look, this is the problem I got with it. If he uncovers a portion of the wall, right? Uses a local and the guy has a big excavation company, and he's like, yeah, let's dig it up. I know where an outcrop is.
Right.
So they dig up a giant face of the wall, and then he takes drill cores out of multiple different blocks. And then he has them tested for the magnetic alignments of the, basically when the rock was formed, you're going to have all these, magnetic particles in the rock all facing north or whatever. Basically, right. They're going to be aligned to the magnetic field of the Earth during the formation of the rock.
Yes.
And so the argument was that every different core that he took, the alignment was the same.
Yeah.
Meaning that this was a natural formation, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, that people won't build a wall.
If they're quarrying rock, the rocks are going to be flipped, and so the alignments will be all oriented in different directions, right?
Yeah.
That's the argument. So there's two things. First of all, there's a lot of stuff about ancient masons that we don't understand how they did certain things, and they built walls in ways that we don't do today. So there is the possibility that actually was a concern, and I think there is some evidence that very well known and accepted stone wall constructions have all the alignments in the same direction.
Yeah, that they're aligned to the earth.
But
yeah,
the other argument is that this is maybe partially a natural formation that was utilized and altered by people, by intelligent beings, right? We also see that where they take a natural thing and then they alter it, and there are strange things built into that wall that look like lintel stones and windows and archways. That's what you need to check.
Right. And in some cases, I mean, there are pictures, of not that section that they dug up specifically, but older pictures that are in newspapers. We got sent a bunch of this material by somebody who lives there that we had on our show, where the blocks have bevels. They're beveled all the way around on the faces, and that just doesn't happen on a natural object, at least. And now, so it may be a natural object where they just went in and it was already sort of fractured and all that, and to look like a wall, and then they beveled all the fractures. But that doesn't mean, but it still means that somebody worked on it.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So I guess I don't think it's conclusive. It's suggestive for sure. The evidence that he tested that Scott, got from those cores, but it's not conclusive.
Right. And the other thing is the. And this is a bit more of, so then of course the question becomes, well, what is it if it's a natural formation? And they try to say, what is it called?
A sand dike.
A sand dike. Now,
sandstone dike.
Yeah, sandstone dike, which is basically the geological concept here is you have some sedimentary layer that cracks, it splits open on the surface, and then eventually that crack gets filled in with different material, and then that material lithifies, turns into stone. Right. And then later people or erosion or whatever comes along and starts working at that. And the material that filled in the crack is a little bit harder and of a different composition. And so the stuff around it erodes faster. And so you end up with this thing that might look like a wall. Well, we looked up a bunch of sandstone dikes and they don't look anything like this.
Okay.
They have very naturally looking, they look natural and they're not straight. And they I don't know. It's, in other words, if it is that kind of formation, it's unique and worthy of study just by that fact. But because it has this sort of stigma around it that it might be a natural artifact and very, very old, and in the Americas, that's 3 strikes against it.
Right.
They don't want to look at it.
If I'm remembering right, there are stone rings that all the stones are aligned magnetically the same way.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I mean, Kyle's right. I can't think offhand of any specific sites, but I do remember reading about magnetic alignments that are, where they're all aligned the same way.
Yeah, which means they had some intuition or some way of testing that when they aligned these stone circles.
That's right.
Because I'm sure I want to say Avebury is one of the ones they've tested and found that all the stones have the same alignment on them.
Yeah.
So either that,
I seem to remember something about it with Karnak, possibly. I can't remember.
Either they had a way of determining the alignment, or they were able to change the magnetic field of the stones.
Yeah, now that's a really interesting idea. Some stone artifacts seem to have magnetic hotspots built into them in specific places. I'm thinking maybe it's the Olmec heads that have this. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is Olmec related stuff where basically they've got these gigantic statues. They're not statues. They're humongous sculptures of faces. Yeah. And they have magnetic hotspots in specific areas. And it's were they aware that those hotspots existed?
Right. Or did they somehow create them?
Or did the process that they used to make those sculptures generate those hotspots?
Also possible, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember seeing I don't know, like a Discovery Channel, sort of one of those debunking shows talking about the Olmec heads. And, I mean, those things are, in excess of multiple tons, if I remember right.
Yeah, they're huge, and they're made out of very hard, dense stone.
So, in the show, what they did is they made one that was like a quarter of a ton. And they didn't actually make a head. They just took a block that was a quarter of a ton and showed that you could move this quarter-ton block from where they think they were quarried to where, they found them without any kind of advanced technology.
Oh, is that like Easter Island? Is that what you're talking about?
No, it was the Olmec heads.
Oh, okay. Because I know they did that same thing with the Easter Island heads too. It wobbled them back and forth to get them to move.
Well, in this case, though, they just with manpower moved these like 500-pound blocks or whatever. And then, they had to put it on a raft, and they had to, the raft had to have enough displacement where it barely fit on the river they put it on. And, they got it there, and they're like, see, now we've proved how they moved them. I'm like, that's nowhere near the size of the ones they were moving.
Yeah.
Now why don't you take one of the, a 5-ton block and see if you can do it that way?
Yeah, or 70 tons or whatever they actually weigh, right? Because, I can't remember if we've ever said this on your show before, but Kyle and I have had many conversations. We both are, we're builders, we do construction and we operate heavy machinery, and we're familiar in some cases with moving heavy loads, not like the big guys do. Some people move really enormous loads. Our dad moved a lot of, worked with cranes and moved heavy loads, and it's a big deal, and it doesn't scale. It's not a one-to-one scale, right? It's not a linear scale, I should say. Like the difficulty of moving a 1-ton block versus the difficulty of moving a 10-ton block. The 10-ton block is not 10 times harder. It's it's hundreds of times harder, right? So in other words, it's not a linear scale. The difficulty doesn't scale in the same way. Like, so if you're going from moving a 10-ton block to a 100-ton block, that's not the 100-ton block is not only 10 times harder than the 10-ton block.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's much, much more than that. And when the weights get enough, you begin to have material failure. Not only the material failure of the object you're trying to move, right? Like, in other words, if you've got a block with square edges, you've cut it nice and sharp, and it weighs 100 tons, and then you want to pick it up, you have to be very careful not to break those sharp corners off that block.
Right.
Because the edge, you're putting a large fraction of the weight of that block onto that corner wherever your strap is going around, however you're picking it up. You've got to be very careful. And then you have material failures and the things you're trying to use to move it. So rolling a 1-ton block on like logs will work, but if you put a 100-ton block on those logs, the logs just fracture into pieces. They stop being able to hold the weight. Or I don't know how much you want me to nerd out on this, but then you also have the problem of what is the thing that you're using to pick the block up with sitting on, and can that hold the weight, right? In other words, you've got to have a nice road base. If you're going to move it, if you've seen everybody's seen pictures of the shuttle, back when we had a space shuttle, when they used to move it, that gigantic machine they put it on.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, they put on that enormous machine to roll it from, where they work on it to where they're going to launch it. They built that road for that machine to roll on very specifically. It has to hold that weight.
Yeah.
So in a lot of places where these big blocks are, even if you can come up with all kinds of interesting ways for them to move blocks around, you got to have a road. And the roads don't exist in a lot of cases. There are no roads from where they quarried the blocks to where the blocks are.
Where did the road go then?
Where did the road go is the question. That's right.
I know there were also people who said, we figured out how they built the pyramids. We built this little one. And we just